Never assume you've seen it all before. This is one of the biggest contributors to leadership failure. You have to go in assuming there'll be surprises. We all have these prejudices that we build up based on success elsewhere, and they may work in this new situation. They may be wrong.
Welcome to How Leaders Lead. I'm David Novak, and every week I have conversations with the very best leaders in the world to help you become the best leader you can be. Today I'm talking with Peter Cuneo, the former CEO and vice chairman of Marvel Entertainment, and the man behind one of the most remarkable turnarounds in recent years. When Peter stepped in as CEO, Marvel had just come out of bankruptcy, but under his leadership, it became one of the most valuable entertainment brands in the world. By the time it was sold to Disney, Marvel stock had risen from 96 cents a share to over $50. In this conversation, you're going to see the leadership principles that drove those results. And let me tell you, a big reason is Peter's ability to embrace the unknown. See, for most people, uncertainty breeds fear. But for Peter, unfamiliar territory is an opportunity to innovate, to grow, and to find out what you and your team are really capable of. Great leaders develop that ability to embrace uncertain situations. And today, you'll see exactly what it looks like in action. So here's my conversation with my good friend and soon to be yours, Peter Cuneo. I got to tell you, I'm happy to have you here. And one of the things that I got to ask you is that what's something that you learned about real leadership by being around fictional, iconic superheroes at Marvel every day?
Well, the nice thing about 4,700 characters that you own and control makes life, in some ways, much easier than if they were alive. We were effectively their agents, except our fee was 100% of what they earned, and they never talked back. So we never had to debate with them on how we were doing their movies or comic books or whatever. Yeah, it's one of the things I learned is if you're into the IP business, you want to own and control all your IP.
Yeah, I can see that. And when I think about being the CEO of Marvel, that's such a cool business to be in. And I don't even people even think about it as a business. But how did you go about just attacking the business opportunity? Because I know when you went in there, a lot had to be done. You had to turn it around.
Well, Marvel had just emerged from bankruptcy when I came as CEO. It had been in bankruptcy for about 2 years. And I always tell people that the process of going through bankruptcy is you can relate to chemotherapy. You emerge from your treatment. You are hopefully cured or certainly in remission, but you've lost all your hair and you are very weak. And what happens for any company in bankruptcy is akin to that, in that you are very weak. The financial way you are organized coming out of bankruptcy is not the best way for the business. It's only what the creditors would agree to. And there very often is a mismatch completely. And in Marvel's case, when we came out of bankruptcy, we had that mismatch. It was what the creditors would buy into, not what we really needed. So I knew that would be one of the early challenges. The other thing is, talk about being weak, lose your hair. Well, a lot of good people had left Marvel because they could, and because there was a lot of uncertainty about the future. The bankruptcy lasted quite a long time, and so on. So part of the challenge when I came was finding new people, and in some cases, re-energizing and attracting good people that left the company to believe in our future and to come back to the company. Not easy.
When you took the job at Marvel, as I understand it, you'd never made a comic, you'd never made a movie. What was that uh-oh moment maybe you had when you realized just how much you didn't know? I mean, was that something that concerned you, or how'd you go about learning a business that you weren't familiar with? You'd done a lot of hard goods, a lot of different products, different turnarounds. So this is a whole new game.
Yeah. Well, of my 7 turnarounds, 5 were new industries, completely different from anything that I had done before. So I was very used to going into environments where maybe I didn't have a background in the particular business, I do think that it's actually in a turnaround a positive to have some people come in that are completely learning a new business because they can see the craziness that may have existed and is the cause for the company being near bankruptcy or being weak and needing, a lot of change. And so for me, it was very clear to me very quickly that we weren't going to compete the way other people did that made films or comic books. We were going to change the rules of the game, and we could see, some of the flaws, the warts of those industries, and avoid them, and in fact do things quite differently. And I will tell you that the reason Marvel was successful was not just that we made very good films and comic books, but our culture was completely different from anyone else. The value system that we put in, myself and the board, we had a great board, was this: we're going to take risks, we're going to change the rules of the game and not be other people. And needless to say, the rest is history.
You know, a lot of people talk about culture, and they get the values and they write them up on the wall, they laminate them, they put them up there, and that's what you're supposed to stand for. But it's another thing to really drive it deep in your company. So let's take this idea of risk being a risk taking culture. How'd you drive that? How'd you drive that in your organization so it wasn't just the board and the people in the corner office believe it?
So, David, I gotta say that I agree with you on one thing: putting something on a plaque and putting it up on the wall does nothing. Does nothing for change. What we need is quality leadership to espouse what the culture will be, and for that leadership to back it up with their actions. Talk is very cheap, and nobody in the organization is going to believe you until they see your own behavior. And in a turnaround, there are lots of opportunities to back up what you're saying because you're going to need to make a lot of change. And for me, culture is two facets. One is how we're going to treat each other, flat and simple. How we're going to treat each other in the organization, and how we're going to treat our business partners outside the organization. Do we respect our customers? Believe it or not, a lot of the turnarounds I went to didn't respect the customer. I know it sounds wild, but um, are we going to work closely with our suppliers, to do the best job we possibly can? What about our investors? What about, and so on and so forth? Equally important in every turnaround, that part of the culture was messed up, was crazy, actually, in some cases. The second part of culture to me is, all right, what do we have to do as a business to really prosper? What do we need to get an A plus in? We want to be A plus in everything, but the reality is we're not, because no one is ever A plus in everything. But what are the ones that we really want to have to be A plus? Is it new products? The way we treat customers? Is it our advertising that projects a company that customers will value, not just for the products or the services, but for what we believe in? It's all those things. And amazingly, in a lot of these businesses, what they had to be really good in, they were just the opposite, and didn't realize that they had to be good, which is, again, it's hard to believe, but
You know, Peter, one of the things that you obviously mentioned earlier was the fact that you wanted to change the game. You changed the game in the industry. Looking back, what was the biggest thing you changed in the industry, and how difficult was it for you to take people with you to get that done?
well, let me say first of all, and I'll get into that. But first of all, I was not arrogant enough to think that I could walk through the door, read a script on a movie, make changes, and what have you. Okay, weak leaders would have done that. They would assume as the leader, they would have to be all knowing and whatever. And I've never bought into that. And everyone knew that I had no background in things. So my role for the first 6 months was to ask a lot of questions of a lot of people. And I was in learning mode. In the case of film, I can't take credit for Marvel getting into the film business because the first film in the new era of Marvel was X-Men 1, and it was already being filmed when I joined the company. And I actually went to the set in Toronto my second week or something on the job just to visit. And so the idea of Marvel getting into movies and building franchises was not mine. I will take credit for staying out of the way. I'm not mucking up the creatives, both in comics and in movies, making sure as best I could that we had the right people. Although, again, how much judgment could I bring to the table? But I did know that they already had part of this new culture, this changed the rules of the game. And if you get into some of the things we did, casting for the movies, okay, the Hollywood system would want you to find some big actor or actress that gets a lot of money up front and a big back end and would, quote, make your film. I always love that phrase. If you have so and so in the lead role in your film, you've made automatically you're going to make money. And we resisted that completely. We just wanted good actors and actresses. They would be, behind a mask a lot of the time. And the heroes were going to make, our characters were going to be the stars that make the movies. So a lot of back and forth and unhappiness in Hollywood with Marvel because of that basic change. And we cast unknowns in a lot of the films. We also took chances on certain people. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. mugshot was all over the news 3 months before we cast him as Tony Stark. In Marvel's own, we formed our own studio eventually. This was the first film where we weren't partnering with a big studio, and it had to be a hit. We'd raised a lot of money, and the company took a chance, and the rest again is history. He got himself together. He's been tremendous in that role. Still is today.
Do you know that I was the only one who believed in you? Everyone else said I was crazy to recruit a 14-year-old kid. I just wanted to be like you. And I wanted you to be better.
And who just won the award for best supporting actor? Excuse me. I mean, it's Robert Downey Jr. So we were willing to take risks. He was toxic at the time. No one would hire him when we did. So we were out there and we were doing things differently and what have you. In comic books, one of the big issues that I had when I came in was that trying to learn the characters in the comic books. I had to start at I don't remember the exact number, but let's say Spider-Man 456. Well, what happened in the previous 455 comic books? And the origin stories are very important to superheroes. And this is something that attracts, fans. And so we actually started doing comic books, still maintaining the ones in place, but now retelling the story of the characters from day one, from their origin, from what had been basically, comic book number one. We made very few changes. Spider-Man was bitten by a radioactive spider. Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man by being bitten by a radioactive spider originally in 1961 or 2. When we started this over, which was around 2000, he was bitten by a genetically altered spider. And in 2000, he had a cell phone. He didn't have a cell phone in 61. But, these are not big changes in the origin stories and so on. So again, constantly looking for, new ways to attract fans.
Now, as you drove that need to look for new ways, How did you, was it challenging to get your people to think differently? And how did you deal with that? Or did you have to, they just automatically embraced it and said, hey, Peter, you're right on the money. We're all in.
It's interesting in creative businesses as opposed to more call it fixed asset businesses. Okay, in creative businesses, you're dependent on the creativity of of human beings, what's in their minds. And one of the things I had learned in other businesses that had creative elements, advertising, for example, you wanted to create a culture where every idea is worth talking about. There are no stupid ideas. This is the way you get to sift through, and when people feel comfortable throwing out what may be viewed as completely nuts. But remember, we were changing the rules of the game. So I was, but the whole organization, the board, was interested in new ideas, new approaches. Once the organization sees no one says, you're an idiot, what are you talking about? Or, it brushes you off in a meeting or whatever, but want to talk through every idea, that's changing the culture, and it gets around and it's infectious. It also gets outside the company and allows you to hire back some people or hire new people that you wouldn't have gotten unless they understood that the culture really had changed.
Hey everyone, it's Kula from How Leaders Lead. And a couple years ago, we did a survey of all of you podcast listeners. And in it, you told us that you would like more of David's point of view on some of the topics that he talks about with the guests that he interviews. And in case you didn't know, we have an episode that does just that. Every Monday, we release an episode called 3 More Questions with David Novak, where I put David in the hot seat and get his point of view and his take on some of the concepts that he talks about with the guests that he interviews. It's a great way to get learnings from David and to hear about his experience leading Yum Brands, a company of over 1.5 million employees. So if you haven't subscribed to the How Leaders Lead feed wherever you get your podcasts, do that now so that you never miss an episode of 3 More Questions and so that you can get coaching from David himself.
One of the things you also mentioned about the important, it's key to a powerful culture is just the customer focus that you have. And, one thing about Marvel movies, I'm sure, is that, your customers are rabid fans. How did you tap into the loyalty of your customer base and leverage that as you continued to do movie after movie after movie? Because I can tell you, seems like this has got to be one of the most, once you get a user, you got a user for a while if you treat them well.
You're totally right. A little bit of history on comic books. One of the assets or one of the advantages I thought that I had at Marvel versus other companies was that our Marvel characters are very different from most other competitors. The brilliance of Stan Lee from 1961 to 1965, he and some great editors created all these characters that you now think of as the A-list of Marvel. And what made them different? They created characters who were flawed, who human beings could identify with, who had the same problems you and I do and all the fans did. Okay? And this was the brilliance of what they did. And so, yes, they had superpowers, okay? But a lot of times they couldn't handle the superpowers. People were afraid of them because they didn't understand. The US government passed laws against the X-Men because they were mutants. They had these powers and they couldn't understand them. By the way, do we not have that problem today in the world? I mean, it's worse than ever, actually. And every high school student thought of themselves as a mutant. Will people like me? Will I be popular? Will I, will a girl, sitting across from me like me if I ask her for a date? How do I balance my study? All of these things. Minority groups always loved the X-Men because they're mutants. Peter Parker can't get a date with Mary Jane in high school, who he loves, because he's a nebbish. He's a nerd. He can't handle his powers. He gets his uncle killed because he got, basically too arrogant about his powers. So That was the greatness of Marvel characters. So when we started making movies, we had a simple concept, really. It was a big action scene to start, in the middle, a modest action scene, and then a big action scene at the end. Everything else in the movies was character development. The viewer was learning about the character, was learning their origin story, was seeing that they had their own challenges and problems, just like they did. And it was very powerful. The first film we did was X-Men 1. And on Friday night, when it was premiering in the US, the lines were around the block. Now, not all those people on those lines were comic book fans. Most of, look, 5 or 10% of the US are comic book fans. That's it. Okay, but the power of the comic book people in popular culture was much bigger than the number of people in the industry. And once you see the newspaper, oh, this movie called X-Men just premiered and it's breaking box office records, I got to go see it, knowing nothing. Most people walking through into the theater had no idea X-Men was the most popular comic book in the world at the time.
Speaking of stories, one of the questions I always ask people is just when you think back about your upbringing, what's a story from your childhood that really impacted the kind of leader you are today?
Well, I certainly didn't think of it as leadership at the time, but I have something on my website called the 32 Essentials of Superhero Leadership. And the background is that about 20 years ago, I was asked to give a speech on leadership to a big group. And truth be told, I had thought very little, surprisingly to me now, looking back, about my own leadership, what I'd learned. It was all an adventure. I had this, adventurer gene. It was all an adventure, and I was more of a risk taker than most human beings for whatever reason. I'm not sure. Probably the way I was raised. When I was very young, my father, who was a Navy officer, had been in World War II in the South Pacific, was a reserve officer. And when the Korean War started, he was called up. And so in a 2-year period, we went from living in New York City to Pensacola, Florida, to Bremerton, Washington, to a mothball fleet, which is Bremerton is near Seattle, then down to San Diego, big Navy base, and then to Philadelphia. My father did some work at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard over a 2-year period. So I did the 4th and 5th grades on the road, so to speak. And I saw, even as a young person, that there were even cultural differences in the United States. I didn't really think about it. It wasn't conscious. It was just, I had to make friends in 4 different places. And then we went back to New York City after the war was over. So I often cite the fact that very effective leaders are very comfortable being either making a decision to go into an alien environment or being thrown into an alien environment. We all have our cocoon, right, David? We're comfortable in our cocoon. We like ourselves usually in the cocoon, and something happens to break us out. Maybe it's a job decision. We're going to a completely different city or country for a job. That's something we did ourselves. Maybe it's, unfortunately, a health thing comes in. It's not a good thing. But generally, when I'm talking about alien environments here, I'm talking about different, not bad, but different.
We'll be back with the rest of my conversation with Peter Cuneo in just a moment. As you can tell, Peter is a guy who isn't afraid of a new challenge. And his mentality reminds me of an insight Jenny Rometty shared with me. As the CEO of IBM, she regularly found ways to get out of her comfort zone so that she could learn.
You will only grow when you're uncomfortable. And I've talked to so many people around the world that resonate with that. And I try to say to them, I actually got to the point where I love to feel uncomfortable because then I'm like, yes, I'm learning, I'm learning. And so I would even look to put myself as a CEO, particularly in those positions, or I'd be seeing a client that ran a railroad. I got to learn railroad business before I get there, and it was like, if you start feeling like you're not, I would say to people, if you're feeling so comfortable in a role, you do need to change it because you are not learning. So growth and comfort never coexist.
Go back and listen to my entire conversation with Jenny, episode 66 here on How Leaders Lead. When you look at all these places where you've gone, you've turned around businesses, do you have a playbook for getting that done?
Actually, no, not really. One of my 32 essentials says, never assume you've seen it all before. That's a one-liner. Okay. And I think after that, on the same line, I say this is one of the biggest contributors to leadership failure. You have to go in assuming there'll be surprises. In my case, of course, I was learning in many cases new industries. Certain things were the same. You knew you were going to have to change the culture. To what? You weren't sure from the outside, but you knew that the culture was bankrupt in these turnarounds. And you knew to have that. You knew there'd be some other obvious challenges. Maybe some people just can't make the trip with you. They don't believe in what you're doing or what have you. And there'll have to be some changes and so on. But generally, I say keep an open mind. There will be surprises. Never assume. We all have these prejudices that we build up based on success elsewhere, and they may work in this new situation. They may be wrong. I tried to stay very, very open-minded
That's great.
And so on.
That's great. And that open-mindedness led to the specific playbook for each turnaround. And, Peter, this has been so much fun. And I want to have some more with what I call my lightning round of questions. So are you ready
Sure.
for this? Okay. What 3 words best describe you?
Very, very impatient.
If you could be one person for a day besides yourself, who would it be?
Abraham Lincoln.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
People who say that leaders are born, not made.
What's the best city you've ever lived in?
Well, I've been blessed a lot of good places, but I'm going to say my hometown, New York City.
Who's your favorite Marvel character?
Wolverine. It's one of the X-Men.
Yeah. What's one fact only a Marvel CEO would know?
Outsiders don't appreciate and never the role of the content oriented people, the people in finance, people in legal, the board, some of the big owners played a very, very important role in Marvel's success. They just don't get any real press.
What's the one thing you do just for you, Peter?
Every Saturday morning, I probably watch a silly movie streaming just to completely detach myself from the real world.
Besides your family, what's your most prized possession?
Boy, there's nothing close to my family. I just have to say my friends, my good friends.
If I turned on the radio in your car, what would I hear?
You'd hear me listening to old radio shows on Sirius XM. There's a channel that that actually plays old radio shows going back to the 1930s. And they have all genres, from mysteries to police to comedy.
What's one of your favorite daily rituals, something that you never miss?
My two cups of coffee in the morning, one caffeine, one decaf.
All right, we're out of the lightning round now, and I've got a few more questions, and we'll wrap this up. Is there anything that you picked up about leading at work that you've carried with you to help you become an even better leader at home?
I wish I could say that. I mentioned that I'm very impatient. Being impatient for turnarounds is a very good thing. Being impatient at home is not necessarily a good thing, as my wife would tell you. I'm very lucky. I'm married for 54 years to an amazing woman who's put up with me, and I mean that literally, all these years. Unconditional love. We've traveled and moved a lot, chasing jobs. I've been an expat in Ottawa, Canada. We've been in California. We've been in New Jersey. We've been all over the place, and she's always hung in there. And I give her 95% of the credit for raising two wonderful boys who've made us proud and married great women from really high quality families. And we have 6 grandchildren now. And while I preach to them occasionally on my, learning leadership principles, they seem to be doing really well.
Yeah, that's great. And as you look forward, what do you see as your unfinished business?
Well, I'm really very, tied in and wound up about leadership today, as I talked about, and the lack of good leadership in the world. It's worse than maybe even in human history. I don't know. Just turn on the TV or the radio every day, right? There's something new in every country. And young people learning leadership, because in the end, they're going to have to save us going down the pike.
That's fantastic. And last question here. What's one piece of advice you'd give to anyone who wants to be a better leader? If you had to just pick one thing, I know you got your 32, but what would be the number one?
Take risks. Reach, even if you think you can't get there. The one thing I would say that's very important in my entire life is 4 or 5 times, whether it was professional or personal, I had people who came into my life at certain times that believed in me even more than I believed in myself. I'm not lacking self-confidence, but there were certain heights I just didn't think I could reach. And they pushed me, encouraged me, and I made the effort just to please them, never thinking I'd get there. And they all worked out, actually. So, take risks.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for coming on this show, and thank you for being a superior leader and being someone that can learn from. And thank you for taking the time to share what you've learned, because I think that's an obligation that every great leader takes on. And you've done it, and you're doing it in spades. I wish you luck with your new book and continued success with your podcast.
All right.
Thank you very much,
David. Thank you. I enjoyed it very much, and it's always nice to get questions you've never had before.
A lot of leaders try to avoid the unfamiliar. They'd rather trot out the same old playbook and go over the same old path. But as Peter shows us, great leadership isn't always about sticking to the familiar. You've got to be willing to navigate the unknown. He jumped right into an industry he didn't have a background in. He asked questions. He listened. Then he took smart risks. He fought for culture, and he brought Marvel back to life. Sure, the unknown can be scary, but it's also an opportunity. Every time you step into it, you develop new instincts. You find new opportunities. You get a clearer sense of what others are capable of and what you are capable of. So here's your challenge this week. Where in your life and leadership are you tempted to stick with what's comfortable and familiar? What would it look like if you just started to shake things up? So do you want to know how leaders lead? What we learned today is that great leaders embrace the unfamiliar. Coming up next on How Leaders Lead is David Levy, the co-CEO of Horizon Sports and Experiences and the former president of Turner Networks. So be sure you subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss it. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of How Leaders Lead, where every Thursday you get to listen in while I interview some of the very best leaders in the world. I make it a point to give you something simple on each episode so that you can apply that to your business so that you'll become the best leader you can be.